When I was 8 months pregnant, my father-in-law stood up at dinner and announced, "I will be in the room when she gives birth." My father-in-law Vernon has always operated under the belief that everything in this family belongs to him by default. The moment I got pregnant, he started calling the baby his bloodline, his boy, his name to carry forward into the next generation. By the time I'd hit 8 months, he'd already announced at a full family dinner that he'd be present in the delivery room, whether I wanted that or not. He didn't ask, he simply told everyone, and half the table actually applauded, calling it sweet. I shut it down right there, in front of all of them. Told Vernon directly that the only two people in that room would be me and my husband Travis. Vernon just waved his hand, that gesture he always uses when he's decided not to hear something inconvenient, and said I'd be too busy pushing to even notice he was there. Said his own father had stood in the room for every one of his kids' births, that this was just how their family operated. I found out later that wasn't even true. After that dinner, he brought it up constantly, every single time he saw me. Told his sisters, his neighbors, his church friends. Everyone kept congratulating him like he was the one carrying the baby. When I told him again, point blank, that he wasn't coming, he turned to Travis instead and said a real man's father stands witness for the birth of his bloodline, and that Travis was weak for letting his wife make that call. Travis told him to drop it. Vernon didn't drop anything. He called my doctor's office pretending to help with our paperwork just to ask about delivery room policy regarding family. The office actually called me to verify because something about it felt off to them. That's simply the kind of man Vernon is. He even pulled Travis aside once and suggested he could just slip into the room once I was already deep in labor, like I wouldn't notice a grown man walking in mid-contraction. Travis said absolutely not, and Vernon called him a disappointment for it. He bought a little jacket with the name he'd already unilaterally chosen for my son, stitched right across the back, before the baby had even arrived. Told anyone who'd listen he'd be the very first to hold the child, not me, him. None of this had I agreed to. The day I went into labor, Vernon was already at the hospital before we'd even called anyone. One of the cousins had apparently tipped him off the second my water broke. By the time Travis and I finished checking in, Vernon was already planted at the front desk on the maternity floor, informing the nurse he was the grandfather and needed to be brought back immediately. She told him only people on my approved list could enter. I'd given them exactly one name, Travis. Vernon started arguing right there in the middle of the ward, while other laboring women were trying to get through this in peace. The nurse told him to wait in the lobby. He went to my door instead. Tried the handle while I was in active labor. A nurse physically stepped between him and the door, told him to back off entirely. He sent his sister Nina up to stand outside and tell Travis he was breaking his father's heart. My blood pressure started climbing, and the nurses knew exactly why. The charge nurse finally told Vernon he was disturbing patients and needed to leave the floor entirely. He argued with her too, claimed he had every right to be there. She told him flatly he had no right anywhere near my room and called security. 2 men escorted Vernon off the maternity floor and down to the lobby while he was still going on about his bloodline and his family name. He sat down there with strangers through the entire birth, saw nothing, heard nothing. The first person to hold my son was me. The second was Travis. Then my mother Lynn, who I'd actually wanted there, came up and held him too. Vernon stayed downstairs the whole time and nobody bothered going to get him. By the time Travis and I brought our son Miguel home 2 days later, Vernon had already constructed his own version of the entire story and spread it to everyone he knew. But Vernon didn't know one thing: the charge nurse had documented every single thing he'd done on that floor, and I had copies of those records. I was done being polite about any of this. Done hoping he'd eventually come around on his own. Vernon wanted to fight over my son, and he'd picked the wrong person to fight. We hadn't even been home a full hour before it started. Travis's phone lit up with 17 missed calls from Vernon, alongside a family group text already over 40 messages deep. Words like cruel and vindictive kept appearing from relatives I'd met maybe twice in my life. Travis's sister Nina sent her own separate lengthy text. The part that stuck with me most was where she wrote that their father had cried the entire drive home, that he'd never felt so humiliated in his life. I was standing in my own living room, barely 2 days out from giving birth, holding my newborn son, and somehow I was expected to manage the feelings of a man who'd just tried to force his way into my hospital room. Vernon never once called me directly. He called Travis on rotation, every few hours. First a cold, clipped call, "I hope you're happy with yourself," then hung up before Travis could even respond. Then a soft, sad voice, "I just wanted to see my grandson born, Travis. That's all I wanted." Then anger, "You let her do this. You let her cut me out of my own family." Every single call was engineered to make Travis feel like the guilty party, and I could see it slowly working on him. By day 3, Travis was visibly worn down in a way I could see in every part of how he moved. He drifted from room to room like he was hauling something he couldn't set down anywhere. The family messages never stopped. Every few hours, another aunt or uncle or cousin chimed in about how Vernon was suffering, how we needed to fix this. After we finally got Miguel down that night, Travis sat on the edge of the bed and said maybe we should just let Vernon come see the baby. One visit, supervised, just to settle things down. Every instinct in me said no. Vernon hadn't apologized for a single thing. But looking at Travis, I could see exactly what this whole situation was doing to him. He was still somebody's son, and the weight of severing that completely was crushing him like a stone. So against every instinct I had, I said okay. One visit. At our house, with strict rules. Travis called and Vernon picked up on the first ring. When Travis told him he could come the following afternoon, Vernon said finally, like this had been owed to him the entire time, like we were simply late on a debt. After Travis hung up, I sat down at the counter and wrote out the rules on paper. No holding Miguel without asking first. No taking him to another room. No calling him by any name besides Miguel. No staying longer than 1 hour. If Vernon raised his voice even once, the visit ended immediately. I taped the list to the inside of the front door so it would be the very first thing he saw walking in. My mother Lynn read it and said she doubted a piece of paper would stop that man. I told her it wasn't for him, it was for the record. Because when Vernon broke the rules, and I knew he would, I wanted documented proof he'd been clearly told. Vernon showed up 20 minutes early. I was warming a bottle when I heard the knock at 11:40 and felt my jaw tighten instantly. 20 minutes early isn't enthusiasm, it's a boundary test. And he hadn't even crossed the threshold yet. Travis let him in, and Vernon walked straight past me without a single word, eyes locking onto the bassinet across the room. I stepped between him and Miguel, told him we had rules for this visit. He waved a hand, said he heard, he was only there to see his grandson. I made him sit down before he got any closer. For the first 20 minutes, Vernon did everything correctly, and honestly, that scared me more than if he'd come in shouting. He sat where I pointed, asked before reaching for the baby, cradled Miguel gently, supported his head properly, spoke to him in this soft, quiet voice I'd never once heard from Vernon before. Lynn stood watching from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, not smiling, not relaxing, just watching Vernon the way you'd watch a dog with a known bite history, making no effort to hide it. But for a moment, I actually wondered if I'd been too harsh, if all Vernon really wanted was to hold his grandson and feel included somehow. The room felt calmer than it had in weeks. Then Vernon leaned his face close to the baby and said, "You look just like your grandpa. You've got the Vance chin." Standard grandparent talk. Then, in that same gentle voice, not even looking up, he said, "We're going to call you Little V, since you were always supposed to carry my name." Everything in my body locked tight at once. I said his name is Miguel. Vernon didn't look at me, kept his eyes fixed on the baby like I hadn't even spoken, said he knew what we'd named him, he was just saying what he'd have called him. Then he reached into the gift bag he'd brought and pulled out a small blue blanket. A name was embroidered across it in gold thread, Vernon Jr. He held it up for all of us to see, visibly proud of something he'd clearly worked hard on. I stood up, said that's not his name. Vernon gave me that look he uses when he's decided I'm being unreasonable, said it was just a gift. Was I really going to make a scene over a blanket? I told him a blanket embroidered with a name that isn't his name isn't a gift, it's a statement. He didn't answer, turned his whole body toward Travis instead and said, "Are you going to let her talk to me this way in my grandson's house?" That was the move. Go around me entirely, straight to Travis, make me the problem. But Travis stood up, looked his father dead in the eye, and said, "Dad, it's our house, and she's right. His name is Miguel." Vernon's whole expression shifted completely. The careful, polite grandfather who'd been sitting on my couch for 20 minutes asking permission and speaking gently simply vanished. He stood up, still holding Miguel, looked at both of us with cold, flat eyes, and said, "You're all going to regret shutting me out. I'm this boy's grandfather, and I have rights." I stepped toward him, said, "Give me my son." Vernon didn't move, stood in my living room holding my baby for 3 full seconds, staring directly at me, not handing him over. The message in his eyes was unmistakable. I'm holding what matters most to you, and I'm choosing exactly when I give it back. Then, slowly, like he was doing me some enormous favor, he passed Miguel over. I pulled my son tight against my chest and stepped back. Travis looked at his father and told him it was time to leave. Vernon picked up the blanket with the wrong name still on it, folded it carefully, set it on the couch, said the blanket stays, it belongs to him, and walked out without another word. Didn't look back once. The visit lasted 34 minutes total. That night, I called Valentina, the only person in Travis's family I actually trusted, and she told me Vernon had already spent the entire week making calls. He'd invited over 30 family members to his house for something he was calling a blessing ceremony. Told every single one of them Travis had already agreed to it. Travis hadn't agreed to anything. Hadn't even been told about it. Vernon had rented chairs, ordered catering, called church friends, cousins, sisters, told everyone he'd be officially giving the baby his family name in front of a crowd. When Travis called Vernon and pointed out nobody had asked him about any of this, Vernon said he didn't think he needed permission to welcome his own grandson into the family. When Travis said they weren't coming, Vernon said, "Then I'll tell everyone you chose her over your own blood." Again, Travis hung up. We skipped the ceremony entirely. Instead, I sent a message to the family group text, laying it all out plainly. Vernon had organized this without our knowledge or consent. He'd lied to everyone about Travis agreeing when Travis hadn't even heard about it, and we wouldn't be attending. Some relatives replied saying they'd had no idea Vernon had lied. Others called me disrespectful outright. Nina called Travis directly, told him he'd humiliated his father in front of the whole family. Travis told her Vernon had humiliated himself by lying about Travis agreeing to something he'd never even heard of. After that, Vernon went completely silent. No calls, no texts. 3 full days of nothing. And honestly, that silence put me more on edge than all the yelling ever had. Felt like pressure building somewhere just out of sight. Then, on the 4th morning, the doorbell rang at 7:15. I was feeding Miguel on the couch. Travis was in the shower. I checked the peephole and my whole body locked up instantly. It was Vernon. Nina stood behind him, both dressed like they'd come straight from church, and Vernon was holding a Bible. I didn't open the door. Went down the hall and pounded hard on the bathroom door. The water shut off immediately. Travis came out half-dressed, still dripping, took one look at my face, and went straight to the front entrance. He checked the peephole, then opened the door, blocking the frame without stepping aside. Told his father he couldn't just show up unannounced like this. Vernon held the Bible up at chest height, said he wasn't there to fight, he'd already canceled the ceremony like Travis asked, just wanted to pray over the baby in his own home. His voice came out calm, rehearsed, every word carefully placed. Nina leaned around his shoulder, told Travis their father had been crying every single night, just wanted 5 minutes with the baby. I stood a few feet behind Travis and watched something shift in his posture, that small drop in his shoulders. The guilt was landing exactly as intended. Travis turned to look at me. His eyes were asking the question. I shook my head, slow and clear. No. Vernon caught it. His expression changed and he said, "See, she won't even let me pray. What kind of woman keeps a grandfather from blessing his own grandchild?" Said it loud enough for the neighbors to hear clearly. He was building me into the villain right there on my own porch. I stepped forward, far enough that Vernon could see me directly, and said, "Vernon, you held my son and refused to give him back. You made a blanket with a fake name on it. You called my doctor's office and lied about who you were. You don't get to stand on my porch playing victim." Vernon's face shifted in a way I genuinely hadn't expected. The mask slipped for just a second, and what surfaced underneath didn't look like anger. It looked like something real had finally cracked. His voice broke when he spoke, and he said, "I just want to hold him one more time, please." Then he started crying. His whole face collapsed. hands shaking, the Bible trembling in his grip. He looked past me toward Travis and said, I held you the day you were born and I swore I'd be there for every generation after. I know I pushed too hard, but please don't take my family away from me. Travis looked completely gutted, took one step toward his father. I could feel everything we'd built starting to wobble. I said, Vernon, look at me. He did, eyes wet and red. I said, tell me what exactly you're sorry for. Say the specific thing. He blinked, tears still streaming, and he said, I just told you I pushed too hard. I said, you called my doctor's office and lied about who you were. Are you sorry for that? Silence. I said, you tried to open my door while I was in active labor. Are you sorry for that? Nothing. His mouth pressed into a thin line. I said, you held my baby and refused to give him back when I asked. Are you sorry for that? Vernon's jaw tightened visibly. Whatever had cracked open in him sealed itself shut just as fast. He looked at me with those still wet eyes and said, I'm his grandfather. 3 words. That was his entire answer to everything. Not, I was wrong. Not, I'm sorry. Just, I'm his grandfather. Like the title alone erased everything he'd actually done. I said that wasn't an answer. I looked over at Travis, standing in the doorway, caught somewhere between me and his father, and I could see the whole conflict written across his face. But I needed him here, with me. I said, close the door. Travis looked at his father. Vernon stood there on the porch, tears drying on his face, a Bible trembling in his hand, and he suddenly looked old. Looked like a man watching something irreversible happen in real time. Travis held his gaze for a long moment, then stepped back inside and shut the door. I spent the days that followed preparing, gathered every incident, every date I could recall, every documented thing Vernon had done, and wrote it all into a letter. Not emotional, not angry, a straight factual record. I planned to read it directly to Vernon, with Travis beside me, and with one very specific person present in the room. Valentina mentioned Vernon's own mother was visiting from out of state, staying at his house that week. Travis's grandmother was the one person in that entire family Vernon couldn't dismiss or deflect away. That's exactly where we were headed. The following Saturday, we drove to Vernon's house, Miguel in his car seat, the letter tucked in my bag. Walking inside, I immediately registered the seating arrangement. Vernon in the big chair by the window, the one he always treats like a throne, Nina on the couch, Jorge, leaning against the wall near the back hallway, arms crossed. And in the armchair across from Vernon, the one with the green cushion nobody was normally allowed near, sat Travis's grandmother. Small, perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, watching the door. Vernon stood the instant he spotted us, immediately reaching for Miguel. I said, sit down, Vernon. We're here to talk. He shot me that look. Who do you think you are? Then glanced at his mother. She looked right back at him from that chair and said simply, sit down, Vernon. Let her speak. He sat without a word. I pulled out the letter and began reading aloud, standing in the middle of Vernon's living room with his mother, his sister, and his son all watching. I started with the call to my doctor's office. The date. Exactly what Vernon told the receptionist. How the office had called to verify because something felt wrong to them. I read through the hospital incident. Vernon arriving before we'd even called anyone. The argument at the front desk. Standing outside my door, trying the handle while I was actively in labor. Sending Nina to pressure Travis while my blood pressure climbed. Being escorted off the floor by security while still shouting about his rights. I read about the visit at our house. The blanket. Little V. Holding Miguel and refusing to hand him back when I asked. I read about the ceremony he'd organized entirely without us. The 30-plus people he'd invited. The rented chairs. The lie about Travis already agreeing. I read every word of it. Every incident. Every date. I never raised my voice once. Didn't rush or slow down. The room sat completely silent except for Miguel making small sounds against my shoulder. I said, I am not keeping your grandson from you. You are keeping yourself from your grandson. Every time you push, you lose more time with him. That's not a choice I'm making. That's entirely yours. Vernon looked toward his mother instead of me. She looked right back from the green chair, hands still folded, and said, she's right, Vernon. I raised you better than this. Something in Vernon broke right there, and it was nothing like that performance on the porch. This was the kind of breaking that happens when you scan the entire room and realize there's nobody left in your corner. Jorge had dropped his eyes to the floor. Nina was staring at her own sleeve. His mother just kept watching, neither softening nor looking away. Vernon said, low and flat, you're all turning on me. Travis spoke for the first time since we'd walked in. Said, nobody's turning on you, Dad, we're asking you to stop. Vernon stood up, voice rising with him, not a yell but close. Said he'd given everything to this family for decades, and now he was being told he couldn't see his own grandson, even though all he wanted was to be there for him. I said, you weren't there for him. You were there for yourself. Every single thing you've done was about what you wanted, not what Miguel needed, not what I needed, not what Travis needed. Travis's grandmother said, Vernon, sit down and listen to your daughter-in-law, or leave your own house. Those are your 2 options. He breathed hard through his nose for several seconds, then sat back down. I slid the letter across to him and laid out the terms. No unannounced visits. No contact with my doctor or any medical provider, ever. No discussing Miguel's name, my parenting, or my marriage with anyone in this family. You want to see Miguel? You ask me, not Travis me. You come when I say, and you leave when I say. If you can't manage that, you don't see him at all. Vernon picked up the letter and read through it. His hands shook so badly the paper trembled the entire time. His eyes moved down the page, and at one point he stopped, stared at a single line, jaw setting hard, kept reading anyway. When he finished, he looked up not at me, at Travis and said, and you agree with all of this? Travis didn't hesitate for a second. Didn't glance at me for permission. Didn't soften his tone at all. Said, I wrote half of it. Vernon set the letter down. Nobody spoke. The room held completely still. Then Vernon looked at me, not Travis, not his mother, and his voice came out quieter than I'd ever heard from him. He said, I want to see my grandson. I said, then this is how it works now. I crossed the room and placed Miguel into Vernon's arms, then walked back and sat down beside Travis. Vernon held the baby and didn't say a single word.